Have you ever stood at the edge of your own life, wondering what's left when everything that once gave it meaning begins to fade? Jonathan Blake, the millionaire CEO, admired by many, feared by most, once had it all: status, success, legacy. But behind the polished doors of his corner office, he was silently unraveling. The world saw a man in control, but inside, he was moments away from walking away from his company, his people, from everything. Then, in the quietest moment of his collapse, his secretary, Evelyn Hart, said 5 simple words, and everything changed. What would you do if the only thing keeping you going was the memory of someone you lost? What if the person who saved you wasn't a hero, but someone who simply saw you when you couldn't see yourself? This is not a story about business. It's a story about pain, about silence, about the small choices that bring us back to life. If you've ever felt alone in a crowded room, this story is for you. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories for more heartfelt journeys like this one. Now, take a breath. Let's begin. The city of Boston was blanketed in early December snow. Outside the towering Blake Tech building, wind rushed down Tremont Street, rattling signs and slicing through layers of wool coats. But on the top floor, behind the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, everything was still. It was just past midnight. The last of the cleaning staff had gone. The only light that remained glowed softly from the CEO's office, casting a warm amber hue on the mahogany desk and polished floors. The space, like its occupant, was immaculate orderly, cold, and quiet. Jonathan Blake sat alone. A glass of bourbon sat untouched at his side. The ice had melted long ago. His tie was loosened. His sleeves were rolled, but his posture remained rigid, like a man who couldn't allow himself to crumble even when no one was watching. He stared out at the city. All his life, he'd been a man who made things happen, a former Army captain turned self-made tech magnate, the son of a man who'd believed in building something that would outlive them both. And for years, Jonathan had delivered expanding Blake Tech into a billion-dollar name, employing thousands, innovating fearlessly. But tonight, he was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could cure. The kind that came from fighting for too long, from carrying things alone for too many years, from pretending that none of it hurt. On the desk in front of him lay an envelope, his resignation letter. It was signed, dated, ready. No press release, no farewell speech, just silence. He reached for the glass, but didn't drink. Instead, he traced a finger along the edge of the letter. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it knew what it meant. In the quiet, a single memory rose to the surface: his father's voice, from a voicemail left 2 years ago. Don't build something just to prove you can. Build it so someone else won't have to be alone. His jaw tightened. He had built everything. But somehow, he was still alone. Suddenly, a soft knock at the door. 3 gentle taps, hesitant, unmistakable. Jonathan didn't move. Another knock, slightly firmer. He exhaled through his nose. "Come in," he said, his voice low, hoarse from disuse. The door opened slowly, and in stepped Evelyn Hart. She wore her usual black slacks, a gray turtleneck, her auburn hair pulled into a low twist. No makeup, no perfume, just presence quiet and steady. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said softly, holding a slim file folder. I saw your light still on. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment. It's late. I know, she said, but this needed your signature for tomorrow's board meeting. She walked in, laid the folder on the desk, and paused. Her eyes caught the envelope, the one with his name and resignation, typed neatly in the corner. Jonathan didn't try to hide it. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. Evelyn reached for the folder again, as if reconsidering, then stopped. Her voice was even. Is this what I think it is? Jonathan nodded once. Is it final? I haven't sent it yet, he said, but it will be. Evelyn looked down at her hands, then back at him. Her expression didn't change, but her voice dropped lower. You don't owe me an explanation, she said, but I've worked beside you for 2 years, and I've never seen you look this done. Jonathan let out a dry laugh. That's what I am. Done. There was no bitterness in his tone, just something heavier, like resignation, but deeper, as if something had died a long time ago and he was only now burying it. You know, he said, when my father died, I told myself I'd carry this company forward for him, for his legacy. I pushed through burnout, loss, noise. But tonight, it just feels like I'm still carrying him. Not the dream. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice quiet. That sounds lonely. Jonathan looked at her. Really looked. It occurred to him that in 2 years, he had never asked her much beyond logistics and deadlines. Yet here she was, standing in his office past midnight, not because she had to, but because she saw something and stayed. Do you think I'm giving up? He asked. She thought for a moment. No, she said. I think you've been giving pieces of yourself away for so long. There's nothing left to give. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. Her words hit harder than he expected. The silence stretched between them, heavy, honest. Finally, Evelyn moved toward the door. I'll leave you to it, she said gently. But as she turned, Jonathan's voice stopped her. Evelyn. She paused, hand on the doorknob. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quieter, why are you still here? She turned back, her eyes soft. And after a second, she said simply, because you're still here. Then she left. Jonathan sat there, staring at the door long after it closed. Something about what she said, those 4 words, lingered in the air like smoke. He looked down at the resignation letter again, and for the first time that night, he didn't know if he could send it. Jonathan didn't sleep that night. The city, outside his apartment window, glowed with its usual winter hush streetlights, flickering against frozen sidewalks. A few taxis still sliding down Boylston Street. But inside his penthouse, silence felt heavier. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the kind that crept in when the mind refused to settle. He stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee he wouldn't drink, his eyes fixed on the dark screen of his phone. He had no one to call. Not at this hour. Maybe not at any hour. The resignation letter remained in his briefcase, unsigned. Technically, he could still walk away tomorrow. Clean break. Just like that. But something Evelyn said kept repeating in his head, because you're still here. He didn't know why it mattered, but it did. 6 blocks across town. Evelyn Hart moved through her small 2-bedroom apartment with practiced care. The second bedroom, her mother's, was dimly lit. The low hum of a baby monitor rested on the counter, next to a half-empty glass of ginger tea. Her mother, Claire Hart, had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 3 years ago. Evelyn had moved back to Boston from her overseas NGO work almost overnight, sold her car, took a job that paid steadily, became a caregiver and a secretary, titles that felt foreign at first, but now defined her entire day. She didn't resent it, not exactly. But there were nights, like this one, when she missed being seen as more than helpful, more than someone who managed calendars, doctors, groceries, prescriptions, people. Earlier, when she saw the envelope on Jonathan's desk, her heart had dropped, not because of the company or the consequences, but because something about his face in that moment looked too familiar. It reminded her of the look she'd seen in the mirror once, the night after her mother forgot her name for the first time. It was the face of someone who didn't know who they were without the thing they'd spent their life serving. Jonathan, at 32, had just left the Army when he and his father started Blake Tech in a rented office above a bakery in Cambridge. The business was never just about innovation. It was about building a new life, together, something neither of them could do alone. His father died at his desk, heart attack, instant, no goodbye, no plan, just silence. Jonathan had barely grieved. There was no time. The company needed him. Investors wanted answers. Employees needed direction. So he led, and in doing so, slowly forgot how to feel anything that didn't serve the job. He learned how to handle conflict without emotion, pressure without pause. He turned mourning into motion. People called it strength. But Jonathan knew better. Evelyn, at 28, had just landed in Nepal when she received the message that her mother had wandered away from home. A neighbor found her several hours later, confused and cold. It had been the beginning of the end of the life Evelyn thought she'd have. She came home, took over, let go of what she had planned, and focused on what was left. Her work at Blake Tech wasn't glamorous. It was precise, demanding. But beneath the surface, it was also the only place she felt steady, not fulfilled, but useful. Jonathan never asked about her life outside work, and Evelyn never offered. There was an unspoken agreement between them. Keep it professional. Keep it safe. Keep it silent. But sometimes, silence hides the very thing that needs to be heard. Back in the office, the next morning arrived with the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the clatter of keyboards. Jonathan's corner office door remained shut. Evelyn kept to her usual tasks, sorting documents, screening calls, preparing reports. But inside her chest, something had shifted. She thought about the envelope again. She also thought about a letter, one she hadn't told anyone about, 2 months ago, while organizing archives from the company's early days. Evelyn had come across an old envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. No stamp, no address, just the name Jonathan in his father's handwriting. She'd meant to turn it in, to give it to legal or HR, or someone above her pay grade. But something stopped her. She had opened it, and then she'd kept it, not out of curiosity, but because the contents weren't business-related. They were personal, painfully so. In it, his father had written, "If the weight ever becomes too much, son, don't try to carry it alone. There is no pride in solitude. There is only loss." Evelyn had read it 3 times. and then tucked it in a book on her nightstand. Every day since, she had debated giving it to Jonathan. But how do you hand someone the one thing that might break them more? Now, seeing the resignation letter, the tired way he moved through his day, she wasn't so sure she could keep it any longer. At 7:30 a.m., the top floor of Blake Tech was already alive with the dull rhythm of tension. Most days, the pressure simmered quietly coded emails, clipped tones in elevators, passive-aggressive boardroom smiles. But today, it roared. The silence that Jonathan Blake usually carried like armor had started to crack, and people felt it. Or rather, they sensed it in the way animals know a storm is coming before the first thunderclap. In Conference Room B, the senior leadership team was already seated when Jonathan entered, flanked by Marcus Hale, the firm's longtime CFO, and the closest thing he had to an advisor. The others stood when he walked in, but there was no warmth in it, just formality. Jonathan took his seat at the head of the table. "Let's begin," he said. The meeting was brutal. Investor confidence was slipping. A data breach at a subsidiary last quarter had triggered an avalanche of questions from the press. 2 senior engineers had resigned last week. Stock had dropped 4 points in the last 3 days. And then there was the matter of the vote. Some of the board, Marcus said, carefully, feel that a change in leadership would restore confidence. Jonathan didn't blink. It wasn't the first time he'd heard whispers of replacement, but today, it wasn't whispers. It was paperwork. It was official. It was names on a ballot, options being weighed. "I built this company from scratch," Jonathan said, not raising his voice. "I carried it through a global recession, through 2 mergers, and a death in my family. I've taken 1 vacation in 12 years. I've missed more funerals than I can count, and now you're telling me I'm the reason we're bleeding." The room was quiet. Then someone young, polished, forgettable cleared his throat. "It's not personal," he said. "It's structural." Jonathan looked at him, not with anger, but something worse, disappointment. "Everything is personal," he said. Back in his office, Jonathan stood by the window. Below, the city moved on. Cabs honked. People rushed to meetings. Somewhere, a coffee shop played Christmas music through outdoor speakers. Life carried on, like it always did. He felt nothing. He didn't feel rage, or fear, or sadness. Just a strange emptiness, like standing at the edge of something vast and dark, and knowing you could fall forever. His phone buzzed. Text from Evelyn. "Let me know if you need me in the meeting with board counsel at 11. I'll be outside." He stared at the screen for a moment. She always knew the right time to be invisible, and the right time to show up. A skill few people appreciated. A skill he'd relied on more than he admitted. He typed back, "Yes, be there," and then deleted it. Then typed again, "Maybe, just stand by." Then deleted that too. Finally, he just turned off the phone and dropped it on the couch. He sat back at his desk. The resignation letter was still there. Same neat envelope. Same careful handwriting. He pulled it out. His signature was on it, but part of him wanted to tear it in half. The other part wanted to send it immediately, take the option away. Force the end before it was taken from him. He was tired of waiting for permission to stop pretending. There was a knock on the door. It opened slightly, and Marcus leaned in. "They'll be ready at 11. Jonathan nodded. "Thanks." Marcus didn't move. After a pause, he stepped in and shut the door behind him. You're not the only one who's tired, John, he said. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Marcus sighed, sat down across from him. I've been here since the first client pitch in that freezing office above the bakery, he said. I watched you and your dad work 10-hour Saturdays like they were nothing, and I've watched you grind yourself down since he passed. Jonathan said nothing. Marcus continued, I get it. You're holding this place up like it's sacred ground. But maybe you've forgotten your dad didn't build this place to bury you under it. He built it so you could build something beyond it. Jonathan looked away, not because he disagreed, but because the words landed too close. And if you walk out now, Marcus added, softer. Just make sure it's not because someone else made the decision for you. If you're leaving, make sure it's really what you want. He stood and walked out. Later, Evelyn returned with a printed briefing. She knocked, waited, then entered when he didn't respond. Board counsel's waiting, she said gently. Jonathan was seated, tie off, shirt sleeves rolled. The resignation envelope was in his hand again. He looked at her. What would you do if I left? He asked. Evelyn didn't flinch. That depends. Are you asking what happens to me or what happens to you? He stared at her. I mean it, she said. If you're walking away because you're really done, then maybe you're saving yourself. But if you're walking because they cornered you into a corner, that's not an exit. That's surrender. Jonathan leaned back in his chair. I'm not afraid to start over, he said. I know, Evelyn said, but I think you're terrified of what it means to stay. That caught him off guard. For a moment, he saw it in her eyes, not defiance, but understanding. And maybe something else. Something like belief. He looked down at the envelope once more, then set it aside, unfolded, unsigned. I'll go to the meeting, he said. Good, Evelyn replied. But in her chest, something tightened, because she could feel it. Something in him was cracking, and soon, something would break. The rain started just after noon. Boston sky, once crisp and winter gray, turned into a wet smudge of cloud and drizzle. Outside the Blake Tech building, umbrellas bloomed like quiet protest. Inside, the pressure tightened like a vice. Evelyn Hart stood at her desk, staring down at the cream-colored envelope in her purse. She'd carried it for 63 days, tucked behind a leather notebook she never opened, pressed flat as if hiding it might dull the weight of what it held. It wasn't just paper. It was him, James Blake, founder, visionary, father, gone now 2 years. And yet, in that envelope, his voice still lived. She'd found it by accident, a month ago. While reviewing archived files in the executive records room, she had opened a forgotten box labeled Founders Correspondence, Private. Most of it was routine contracts, handwritten drafts of speeches, old sketches of the company's original logo. And then, the envelope. Unsealed. No formal date, no company letterhead. Only the name written in thick black ink, Jonathan. She should have turned it in. There were protocols for this kind of thing. Legal channels, chain of custody. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the weight of the ink, or how the handwriting slanted, slightly shaky, as if written in a rush or under strain. Maybe it was her own heart, which had started beating faster the moment she picked it up. She sat down right there on the office floor and read it, once, twice, a third time. Each word sank in like a stone. If you're reading this, son, then I didn't get to say what I meant to. I hope it was fast. I hope it didn't leave a mess for you to clean up. I tried my best to make this company a good thing, not just a big one. But if you're the one left holding it, you'll know what it costs. Jonathan, if the weight ever becomes too much, don't try to carry it alone. There is no legacy worth your soul, no success worth your silence. You've always been stronger than me. But strength isn't just about pushing forward. Sometimes it's knowing when to stop, when to ask for help. Let someone stay. Son, let someone in. Evelyn had read that last line again and again. Let someone stay. The irony was sharp, because Jonathan hadn't let anyone stay. Not really. He was polite, respectful, even kind in his way. But no one got close. Not Marcus, not the board, not anyone. Even her, after 2 years working side by side, had never seen more than what he chose to show. But this letter wasn't for the company. It wasn't about succession or strategy or spin. It was about him. And Evelyn knew, with growing certainty, that keeping it from him was no longer protective. It was cowardly. Still, what would it do to him that afternoon? She stood outside his office, the envelope now in her hand. Through the frosted glass, she could see Jonathan seated at his desk, forehead resting in one hand. A posture of someone carrying a weight no one else could see. She didn't knock. Not yet. Her mind flicked back to the morning. The board meeting had gone on without drama. He hadn't resigned, hadn't confronted anyone, just sat through it, spoke when needed, nodded in all the right places. It was unnerving, as if he'd emotionally disassociated from the entire experience, like he'd already left. In body, he was here, but something inside him had already signed the papers. And that terrified her, not because of her job, not even because of the company, but because she had once watched someone fade this same way. Her mother, Claire Hart, had begun to disappear before the diagnosis. Not dramatically, not overnight, just a missed appointment, a forgotten name, a look of confusion during a conversation they'd had moments before. Evelyn had tried to explain it to friends back then. It's like watching someone stand in a room full of people and somehow not be in it. And that's exactly what she saw now in Jonathan. A man physically present, but emotionally slipping out of frame. And if no one reached in, if no one pulled him back, he might vanish, not into illness, but into exhaustion, into isolation, into numbness that never ended. She stepped back from the door. Maybe not yet. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe the door opened. Jonathan stood there, eyes bleary, shirt slightly wrinkled. He looked surprised to see her. Didn't realize you were still out here, he said. Evelyn hesitated, then held up the folder she'd brought earlier. Was just making sure you had what you needed for the investor review. He nodded, motioning her in. She sat across from him, as she had dozens of times before. But this time, her hand hovered over her purse. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her heart raced. He looked at her. You okay? He asked. And for a moment, the urge to cry was overwhelming. Not because of pain, but because someone finally asked. She nodded. I'm fine. Silence. He studied her face, as if sensing something had shifted. Anything else? He asked gently. She glanced down at her bag, fingers curled around the envelope, and then let go. No, she said, not yet. As she left the room, the weight of the letter burned against her side. She hadn't given it to him, but she knew she would. And when she did, nothing between them would ever be the same again. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hadn't left. By evening, the Blake Tech office had emptied out. The usual hum of clicking keyboards, muted conversations, and elevator chimes faded into an uneasy silence that filled every hallway. On the executive floor, it was nearly dark. Evelyn Hart sat alone at her desk. The office lights behind her were off, leaving only the soft amber of her desk lamp casting a weak circle around her notes and files. The rest of the floor had gone to shadow. She wasn't working. Her laptop had long gone to sleep. Her to-do list for the next day remained untouched. She was just sitting. The letter was still in her bag. She had carried it with her again today, thinking maybe now, maybe before the board meeting, maybe right after. But the moments passed. The courage never fully came. And now, she wasn't sure it ever would. For the first time in 2 years, Evelyn was considering leaving Blake Tech. Not because she was angry, not because she had something better waiting, but because she wasn't sure if staying made a difference anymore. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister in Vermont. Mom called me Evelyn today. Second time this week. Thought you'd want to know. Evelyn stared at the message, her eyes stinging with unexpected tears. She wanted to be happy about it, grateful. Instead, she felt nothing but hollow. Because even now, even in the middle of something good, all she could think about was how heavy everything felt. At work, at home, inside her chest. She rubbed her eyes. Maybe this wasn't about the letter anymore. Maybe it was about everything else she'd been holding that no one saw. Maybe she and Jonathan weren't so different after all. Down the hall, in his office, Jonathan Blake was also still there. But unlike Evelyn, he wasn't still. He paced the length of the room, jacket off, sleeves rolled, phone in one hand. No one was calling. He hadn't spoken to anyone since noon. The board hadn't followed up. The media hadn't pressed further. Even Marcus had stopped sending quiet check-ins. The silence should have felt like relief. But it didn't. It felt like standing in a tunnel, waiting for a train that never came. He sat on the edge of the conference table, arms crossed, heart racing for no reason he could name. And then, for the first time in years, he said it out loud softly, bitterly. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. The words sounded foreign, weak, but real. He rubbed his hands over his face, leaned forward, elbows on knees. Somewhere in the dark, the heating system kicked on with a low groan. That was the only sound. Back at her desk, Evelyn stood. She gathered her coat, her bag, checked her phone again. Nothing. She took a breath and walked down the hall, paused outside Jonathan's office. She almost knocked. Almost. But then she turned away. She couldn't do it. Not tonight. Instead, she walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. The numbers ticked down. Ding. The doors opened. She stepped inside, pressed the button for the lobby. And just before the doors closed, she whispered to no one in particular, I'm sorry. Inside his office, Jonathan finally opened the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he hadn't touched in 2 years. Inside was a framed photo of him and his father. taken just 3 weeks before the man collapsed in this very room. Jonathan hadn't looked at it since. He wiped dust from the glass and stared at the image. 2 men, smiling, alive. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat there, photo in his lap, surrounded by everything they had built. And for the first time, he realized something terrifying. He didn't know who he was if he wasn't carrying this anymore. If he put it down, if he left, what would be left of him? What part of him still existed outside this title, this building, this fight? The echo of everything lost wasn't loud. It was quiet, like the absence of music after a song ends, like an empty chair at the dinner table, like 2 people working side by side for years and still feeling alone. Upstairs, the elevator doors closed. Evelyn was already on her way down, and Jonathan. He remained where he was, still, silent, staring into a space his father no longer filled. The next morning, Boston woke to an unexpected frost. Windshield wipers struggled against thin sheets of ice. The Charles River looked as still as glass. On Beacon Hill, the cobblestones shimmered in soft morning gray. It was the kind of morning that made people late to work and gave silence a little more room to breathe. At 7:05 a.m., Evelyn Hart stood just outside the Blake Tech building, coffee in one hand, a file folder in the other. She had barely slept. She'd driven around the block twice before parking. Even now, she considered turning back, but she didn't. Something in her chest tired, as it was told her she had to be there. Not for the company, not even for the job, for him. Upstairs, the office was nearly empty. Jonathan Blake had arrived early. As always, he was seated at his desk, not doing much of anything, just watching the snow begin to fall again outside his window, melting before it hit the street. He hadn't gone home the night before, hadn't changed clothes, hadn't touched the resignation letter. He looked at it now, still sitting in the same spot as yesterday. Just paper, just ink, but heavy like a tombstone. A knock. He didn't respond. The door opened anyway. Evelyn stepped inside, wordless, her coat still on. She set the folder down. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "You didn't send it," she said. Jonathan looked at her. His voice was hoarse. "You came back. I wasn't sure I would," she admitted. "Why did you?" She shrugged lightly. "Could ask you the same thing." Another pause. "Then, without pretense, I think I'm breaking," he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was the first honest thing he'd said in a very long time. Evelyn crossed her arms, stayed standing. "You don't get to break alone, Jonathan," she said. He looked up. "You think you're the only one holding something up. You think the rest of us just exist around your pain, like props in some battle you never agreed to fight." Jonathan blinked. She'd never spoken like this before. She didn't stop. "I've watched you walk in here every day, like a soldier reporting for duty, thinking no one notices the weight. But we do. And we carry it too. Every time you shut down, every time you disappear inside yourself, you leave the rest of us holding what you won't say out loud." Jonathan stood slowly. "I didn't ask anyone to carry it," he said. "I know," Evelyn replied. "That's the problem." He stepped around the desk, closer now, but not threatening. "I don't know how," he admitted. To what she asked, to let anyone in. That was it. The truth. Finally named. He had loved once deeply, trusted his father, believed in loyalty, believed that showing up, day after day, was enough. But somewhere along the way, after the funeral, after the press, after the shareholders and strategies and long nights, he had turned inward, brick by brick, until now. Evelyn exhaled. She reached into her bag and pulled it out. The letter. She held it in both hands. "I found this a while ago," she said. "I wasn't supposed to. It was buried in the archives, but it's yours." Jonathan's breath caught before he even touched it. She stepped closer, pressed it into his palm. "I should have given it to you sooner. I didn't know if it would help or just break something that was barely holding together." He didn't open it yet, just held it, like it might vanish. "What is it?" he asked. "A letter," she said, "from your father." Jonathan looked down at it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Thick, black ink. A name his name. His voice was barely audible. "Why now?" Evelyn paused. "Because yesterday, I watched you disappear." She looked straight at him, her voice steady. "And I couldn't let you?" Jonathan moved back behind the desk, sank slowly into his chair. He didn't read it yet. Couldn't. Not with someone watching, but he kept it in his hands, turning it over like a relic. His eyes stayed fixed on the envelope. "You're the only one who stayed," he said after a while. "I almost didn't," Evelyn admitted. "I almost walked away." "Why didn't you?" She took a long breath. "Because I know what it feels like to be the person no one stays for." Her voice cracked, just slightly. Jonathan looked up at her. For a moment, everything softened. His shoulders, his voice, his eyes. He whispered, "I'm sorry." And Evelyn, blinking fast, nodded. "I know." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when something shifts. When the walls finally start to give. When two people too strong for too long finally let themselves be seen. He held the letter close. She sat down across from him. And for the first time in years, they weren't boss and assistant. They were just two people, not quite okay, but no longer alone. The office was still. Not the polished, sterile stillness it usually held, but a fragile, breathing quiet that felt human, lived in, like something had cracked open and no one dared to move too fast, for fear it might fall apart completely. Jonathan Blake sat behind his desk, the unopened envelope in his hand. His name, Jonathan, written in ink that had faded slightly at the edges, but still held its weight. Evelyn Hart sat opposite him. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just waited. Let him have the silence. Let him choose. Finally, he looked at her and said, almost like a confession, "I haven't read his handwriting in 2 years." She gave a soft nod, barely noticeable, with a steady, almost reverent motion. Jonathan opened the envelope. There was only one sheet inside. Folded once, yellowed at the crease. He unfolded it slowly, laid it on the desk, and began to read aloud. His voice wavered not from theatricality, but from memory, fighting its way back into his chest. "If you're reading this, son, then I didn't get to say what I meant to. I hope it was fast. I hope it didn't leave a mess for you to clean up." His voice caught on the word fast. He cleared his throat and continued, "I tried to make this company a good thing, not just a big one. But if you're the one left holding it, you'll know what it costs." Jonathan's hands tightened around the edges of the paper. Evelyn's fingers curled slightly, but she said nothing. "Jonathan, If the weight ever becomes too much, don't try to carry it alone. There is no legacy worth your soul, no success worth your silence. He paused, looked away. A silence stretched between them, like a thread about to snap. Then he read the final lines. You've always been stronger than me. But strength isn't just about pushing forward. Sometimes it's knowing when to stop, when to ask for help. Let someone stay. Son, let someone in. Jonathan lowered the letter. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at the desk. And then one tear. Just one. It slid down his face, slow and unannounced. He didn't wipe it away. I don't know how to do this, he whispered. His voice didn't sound like him. It sounded like someone stripped of position, power, pretense. Evelyn leaned forward. You don't have to know, she said. You just have to want to. Jonathan closed his eyes for a second, took a breath. When he died, he said, I kept thinking, if I worked hard enough, if I made Blake Tech bigger, faster, sharper, maybe I could outrun the part of me that broke. He looked up, but I couldn't. I just made the armor stronger. Evelyn's gaze didn't flinch. You don't need armor anymore. A beat passed. Then she stood, walked slowly around the desk, stopped just beside him. She didn't touch him, not yet. But she looked down at him with eyes that saw far more than titles, or failures, or ghosts. And she whispered barely above a breath, You're not alone anymore. He exhaled like he'd been holding that breath for years. And finally, he broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but fully. His hand trembled, his shoulders fell, and something in him surrendered not in weakness, but in release. Evelyn knelt beside him, gently resting a hand on his. She said nothing else. There was no need. The 5 words had done their work. Time passed. She didn't know how long. 10 minutes, 30, maybe more. But eventually, Jonathan spoke again, softly. I thought if I let someone see this part of me, they'd walk away. Evelyn squeezed his hand. I almost did. He looked at her. But I didn't, she said. Because this what you're feeling, it's not weakness. It's truth. And the world doesn't need more men who lie to themselves. Jonathan gave a faint smile. The first real one in maybe years. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I should be embarrassed, he said. Don't be, Evelyn replied. Not for being real. They stayed like that a while longer. Not talking, not planning, just being. And when Evelyn finally stood to leave, Jonathan reached for her wrist not to stop her, but to hold her there for one more moment. Thank you, he said. His voice was clear now, still low, still tired but clear. Not just for the letter, for seeing me and not running. Evelyn nodded, a softness in her eyes. Sometimes, she said, you don't need someone to fix it. You just need someone to stay. Then she walked out, and for the first time since his father died, Jonathan didn't feel alone in the room. The next day, Boston thawed slightly. Snow melted in small streaks along the sidewalks. The river shimmered under pale sunlight. It was the kind of day that whispered of new things, not loudly, but with quiet, stubborn persistence. At Blake Tech, the building stirred to life as usual. Phones rang, laptops booted up, coffee cups clinked. But on the top floor, everything felt different. Jonathan Blake arrived later than usual, He didn't walk with purpose. He walked like a man who had stopped sprinting long enough to ask himself why he ran in the first place. There were no notes in his hand, no printouts, no resignation letter, just him, and something quieter in his eyes. A few team members noticed the shift, but didn't comment. Evelyn did. She saw him from across the hallway, coat still half buttoned, hair slightly tousled, expression softer, not tired, not guarded, just present. She met him in his office an hour later. He was standing by the window, again watching the world below. This time, though, it wasn't a look of escape. It was consideration, reflection. "I thought I'd feel lighter," he said, after the letter. Evelyn tilted her head. "And I feel exposed." He glanced at her. "But also, like maybe that's the first honest day I've lived in a long time." She stepped inside, closed the door gently behind her. There was no desk between them now, just air. And years of things unsaid, finally beginning to lose their hold. He turned toward her. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," he said. "You mean the company?" Evelyn asked. "No, the way I've been doing it." His voice didn't shake, but it held weight. "I built something huge, but I shut everyone out along the way, even myself. I'm not sure that's leadership. I think it's isolation dressed up as excellence." She didn't rush to reply. Then simply, "Then maybe it's time to lead differently." Jonathan blinked. "Is it even possible to start over when you're already this far in?" Evelyn shrugged gently. "Only one way to find out." A beat of silence. Then he asked, quietly, "Are you staying?" The question hung in the air, not as demand, not even as hope, just truth. "I thought about leaving," she said. "A lot." Jonathan nodded. "I thought about it too." Then he looked her in the eye. "I realized I didn't want to rebuild this alone. And not just the company, myself." Another pause. "I'm staying," he said, "but only if I can do it right." Evelyn studied him. The man who once commanded boardrooms with sharp words and colder silence was now standing completely bare. No script, no strategy, just intention. Then she smiled soft. "Real." "Then I'm staying too." Later that afternoon, Evelyn sat alone in the break room, sipping lukewarm coffee. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders felt lower, her breath a little deeper. She didn't know what would come next. The hard conversations, the rebuilding, the trust that still needed time. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't carrying it alone anymore. In his office, Jonathan opened a blank notepad. No agenda, no bullet points, just a pen and an honest question at the top of the page. What kind of leader do I want to be? Now no one heard that page turn. No one saw the quiet look on his face. But something had shifted. Not loudly, not with fireworks, but with choice. And that choice made in silence. After years of noise was the beginning of something new. The announcement email had gone out just after lunch. All team gathering at 3:30 p.m. Executive floor conference room. Attendance encouraged. No agenda, no title, just a time and a place. Whispers traveled faster than any memo. The CEO never spoke to the full staff. Not directly. Blake Tech was a company of nearly 800 people. Most only knew Jonathan Blake by reputation, or by brief elevator silence. Some had never heard him speak at all. So when 3:30 arrived, the room filled. Not just with people, but with a quiet, uncertain energy. Something was different. Jonathan stood at the front. No podium, no slides, just him. His suit jacket was gone. His shirt sleeves rolled up. In his hands, a single note card. But he didn't look down at it. Not once. "Thank you for being here," he began. His voice was calm, clear. "I know this is unusual. I haven't done many of these. I probably should have." He looked around, not over anyone, but at them. "Some of you know me as the guy who built this company into what it is today. Some of you may know me as difficult, distant, maybe even cold." A few glances exchanged in the back. He didn't flinch. And you wouldn't be wrong. A murmur, not loud, but surprised. Jonathan smiled just barely. "I've spent a long time believing leadership meant having all the answers, being unshakable, untouchable. Because if I looked too human, I thought the whole thing might fall apart." He paused. It didn't fall apart. He looked down for just a second, but I did. Silence fell across the room. No phones out, no typing, just listening. I lost someone important a few years ago. My father, the man who founded this company. His loss hit harder than I ever admitted. Not to anyone, not even myself. Jonathan inhaled. Instead of grieving, I built. I pushed. I poured myself into this place because it was easier than sitting still with the pain. Evelyn stood near the wall, just inside the room, watching, listening. Her face unreadable, but her presence steady. Jonathan continued, "I know I haven't been the easiest person to work for. I set high expectations. I kept people at a distance. I wore my silence like armor. And many of you bore the cost of that without complaint." He paused. His voice softened. "For that, I want to say something I've never said before." He looked out over the room. "I'm sorry." A breath. "And thank you." Somewhere in the third row. A senior engineer, Greg Wallace, crossed his arms. Eyes narrowed. "Why now?" he asked. Not rudely, just honestly. Jonathan nodded. "Because I finally understood something I'd ignored for too long." He stepped forward slightly. Leadership isn't about control. It's not about perfection. It's not about being the smartest person in the room or the last one to leave. He looked down for a second, then back up. Leadership is about trust, about truth, about letting people see you. Even when you're scared, they might not like what they find. A hush fell again. No one moved. No one even blinked. "And I'm tired," he said, "of pretending I don't bleed like the rest of you." Someone in the back exhaled, audibly. Jonathan's voice remained steady. "I can't undo who I've been, but I can decide who I want to become." He held up the note card. On it were just 3 words, written in pen. "Lead with heart." He folded it in half, put it in his pocket. Moving forward, we're making changes. Real ones. Not just in workflow or strategy, but in how we show up for each other, how we lead teams, how we take care of ourselves and the people around us. He looked across the room again. And if anyone else here is carrying something alone, grief, fear, burnout, I hope you'll hear this. He paused. You don't have to carry it in silence. The room was quiet again, but it wasn't heavy. It was clear. A man at the front of a company had just shown his scars, and the walls hadn't crumbled. They'd opened later in the hallway. A junior analyst stopped Evelyn. "I didn't expect that." She said, "Not from him." Evelyn smiled gently. Neither did he. The analyst hesitated. kind of needed to hear that today. Evelyn placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. Me too. Back in his office, Jonathan sat down with a new legal pad. On it, he wrote 3 columns. People we've lost. People we've neglected. People we need to fight for. He didn't finish the list that day, but he started. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't writing strategy. He was writing truth. It was snowing again. Not the harsh, punishing kind, but soft, gentle flakes that danced under the street lamps outside Blake Tech's headquarters, landing like whispers on the windshield of Evelyn's car. She sat there for a moment, engine off, watching the light change from amber to red, from red to green, and then back again. Inside the building, lights were still on across the top floors, people working late, people who cared, people who were starting to believe this company could be something more than just another tech empire. And it all began with 5 words. Upstairs. Jonathan stood by the same window where, weeks ago, he had nearly quit. But tonight, he wasn't thinking about leaving. He was watching the snow and thinking about beginnings, not loud ones, not celebrated with champagne and press releases, but quiet ones, like staying, like telling the truth, like letting someone see you. There was a knock at the door. He turned. Evelyn, still in her winter coat, cheeks pink from the cold, a paper cup of coffee in one hand. He raised an eyebrow. Still prefer the break room brew. She shrugged. Old habits. He took the cup, their fingers brushing. Then she sat across from him. No laptop, no files. Just her. Just them. You looked peaceful, she said after a while. Jonathan gave a quiet smile. I think I am. That's new. That's earned. He paused. You stayed, he added softly. Evelyn looked down at her gloves. So did you. Their eyes met, and for once, neither felt the need to speak first. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. There's something I've been meaning to ask, he said. Okay. Why you stayed. Not just in the company, but that day in the office, when you could have walked out and never looked back. Evelyn exhaled, her breath fogging the window behind her. I stayed because... She paused. Because you finally let yourself be seen. Jonathan's expression softened. And I've spent my whole life around people who only know how to perform strength. She continued. But when you broke, you didn't shatter. You transformed, didn't it? And I knew I wanted to be around for what came after. The clock ticked past 8 p. Mem. Outside, the snow deepened. Inside, the air felt warm, not from the heat vents, but from presence. I'm not good at this, Jonathan admitted. This. He hesitated, letting people close, letting them stay. She nodded slowly. You're learning. I want to keep learning. A silence. Then Evelyn asked, not just as a CEO, no. He said, as me. The moment lingered, soft, unsure, but open. Then Evelyn stood, pulled something from her coat pocket. A folded piece of paper. I found this in one of the archive files yesterday. It's a draft of your father's original company charter. Jonathan took it carefully. On the bottom, beneath the typed paragraphs, were handwritten words. Build something that outlives the numbers. Something that remembers the people. Jonathan traced the ink with his thumb. It's time I live up to that. They didn't hug. They didn't kiss. It wasn't that kind of ending. It was better. Because when Evelyn walked to the door, she paused, not in doubt, but in certainty, turned back, and said, simply, See you tomorrow. Jonathan. He smiled. Gently. See you then. Evelyn. And for the first time in a long, long time, they both meant it. That was the beginning. Sometimes, the strongest people we know are the ones silently breaking. We build walls to protect ourselves from grief, from disappointment, from love we're afraid to lose. But in doing so, we often shut out the very things that could heal us. Jonathan Blake's story reminds us of something timeless. Success means little if we forget how to feel. It is not weakness to pause, to admit we're tired, to let someone see the parts of us we hide. In fact, it's one of the bravest things we can do. Whether you're leading a company, a family, or simply your own quiet life. Remember, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to start again. Sometimes, healing begins with just one person who sees us and 5 simple words spoken at the right time. So if you're carrying something heavy today, know this: you don't have to carry it alone. Thank you for being here. If this story touched something in your heart, reminded you of a moment, or simply made you feel less alone, then we're grateful to have shared it with you. At Shining Stories, we believe in the quiet power of storytelling to heal, to connect, and to remind us we're not walking this life alone. If you found meaning in today's story, please share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel. Every click helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the beauty of human connection.